Almost exactly 1 year ago, I did an episode on Major League Baseball's impossibly stupid choice to retroactively elevate the old Negro Leagues to Major League status for statistical purposes. It was plain to see at the time that there wasn't a whole lot of deep deliberation that went into the decision. It was the most obvious example you'll ever see of, I wonder what we can do to make ourselves look good for the race-pandering industrial complex today. And as I alleged in the video, I think it's an action that was specifically targeted at two men and two records, because MLB decided, we would score ourselves a lot of race-pandering points if we took these records away from Ty Cobb and Rogers Hornsby. They were icky racists, don't you know? And we handed them to Josh Gibson and Oscar Charleston instead. Wouldn't that be great? Can you imagine all the positive notices we will get in the race huckster Twitterverse? And so, 96 years after his retirement and 64 years after his death, Tyrus Raymond Cobb of Royston, Georgia, suddenly became no longer the lifetime leader in batting average. And as for Rogers Hornsby of Runnels County, Texas, exactly 100 years after he established a mark that he and everybody else thought was going to stand for all time, he became no longer the owner of history's best single-season batting average. How did Major League Baseball imagine they were making the world a better place by doing this? Unclear. But I don't think there was all that much thought invested into it, if I'm being honest. And you know why I don't think that? Because as I said back in that video 363 days ago, I know you guys are doing this because you think it solves the problem of having record holders in your record book who 10 or 11 decades ago failed to live up to 21st century standards of racial sensitivity. But when you try to apply brute force solutions to specific targeted problems, or perceived problems, as the case may be, you know what the actual result is? 100% of the time, you create unintended, unwanted consequences that you never contemplated, because that's what happens when you attempt to rewrite history in order to make it look more politically agreeable. And sometimes those unintended, unwanted consequences, they stand in opposition to the impression that you were trying to create when you did the thing you did in the first place. So, long story short, if you thought Jack Roosevelt Robinson of Pasadena, California was the man who racially integrated the major leagues, well, you thought wrong, my friend. Well, actually, you thought right for a little over 75 years, but then you started being wrong when the idiot Rob Manfred, in his maniacal desire to be patted on the head by the race huckster industry, declared exactly 1 year ago that the old Negro Leagues are all major leagues now. Because when he did that, he also, quite unwittingly, deprived Jackie Robinson of his greatest signature achievement. So, we really should probably stop doing the Jackie Robinson Day ritual every year and having every player in both leagues wear number 42 for that one day in April. Hell, we probably should unretire the number 42 altogether, because according to the rules of the game that MLB has chosen to enact, the man who actually integrated Major League Baseball was a pasty white left-hander named Eddie Klepp. A guy who made one appearance in one regular season game for the Cleveland Buckeyes of the Negro American League against the Indianapolis Clowns in June of 1946. And he probably had no idea he was such an historically important figure, at least not when he was summoned from the bullpen by manager Quincy Troop with the bases loaded and one out, and proceeded to let all of the inherited runners score before mercifully retiring the side and never again appearing in another professional ball game ever again as long as he lived. So, why does Eddie Klepp erase Jackie Robinson? Because segregation is segregation, is it not? And the major leagues are the major leagues, are they not? So, if we are going to retroactively assert that the Negro American League is a major league whose records all go into the MLB record book, and if we're going to acknowledge the reality, which is disputed by no one, that all professional baseball leagues enforced racial segregation one way or the other until after the Second World War, then I'm sorry if anybody doesn't like it. But according to the rules as Rob Manfred and MLB have laid them out, the man who racially integrated the major leagues is not Jack Robinson, it is Eddie Klepp. So I think the reasonable thing to do at this point is to start an Eddie Klepp personality cult. We will call ourselves the Kleptomaniacs. Maybe we'll sell t-shirts at Curmudgeon Shop, right alongside the ones that say, I ate a Chuck Schumer burger and all I got is E. coli in this lousy t-shirt. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where if you think Jackie Robinson's got it bad, just imagine being Pluto. Waking up every day not even knowing whether you're a fancy planet or just a tiny, insignificant Kuiper Belt object. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant, and I have come here tonight to talk about women's pro basketball. Okay, yep. Just go ahead and get it out of your system right at the top. It'll be better that way. Yeah, I don't know, Jim Eagle. If the audience needs to get their laughter out of the system before we proceed, should we just play a WNBA highlight reel? I think we probably should do that. Wow, look at that. The skill and the athleticism are just off the charts. These are the world's finest athletes, ladies and gentlemen. And look, I can't speak for anybody else, but man, I could watch women play basketball for hours and hours and hours. And yes, I do realize there are some of you in the audience right now who might not be so highly attuned to the cutting edge of the popular culture as some of the rest of us are. And you're saying, wait, there's a women's pro basketball league? And yes, as it turns out, there is. It's called the Women's National Basketball Association. And it's a long-term CIA black project designed to see how much money people are willing to pay to watch things that nobody in their right mind could ever want to watch, even for free. Or even if you paid them. And I think for myself, yeah, I will meet you halfway in the name of cultural ecumenicalism. If you provide me a private luxury box, full catering spread, and I ain't talking about no concession food, I want the full spread the VIPs get with the Branzino and all that shit. I want an open bar, obviously. I want a nice limousine ride to and from the venue, and the limo needs to also have an open bar. Then I might be willing to potentially consider going to a WNBA game. Maybe I could watch the Sky play the Fever. They really do have the best team names in the WNBA, don't they? And if you've been watching this program for any length of time, you'd already know what a great fan the host is of non-plural sports team names. And the WNBA has got no shortage of them. They got the Liberty, the Dream, the Sun, the Mercury, the Storm. And look, I'm sorry, call me a terrible, filthy misogynist if you must. But how seriously am I supposed to take a contest between the Sky and the Dream, or the Storm and the Sun, or the Fever and the Mercury? Doesn't it all just sound like very angry weather reports? You may find yourself asking, why is Cap talking about this women's pro basketball league that I never knew was a thing? Well, I'm glad you asked. You remember how we were talking about Eddie Klepp back during the opening segment, the man who integrated the major leagues fully 10 months before the interloper and imposter Jack Roosevelt Robinson? And you remember how part of that discussion had to do with sports leagues going too far down the road of race pandering in specific, but also unavoidably the various other excesses that always arise when you start going down that particular road? And it's fascinating to observe, I think, that women's professional sports is the venue where that phenomenon seems to have taken hold the most fiercely and the most intractably. If and when you happen to see headlines about the WNBA in your news feed, there's around an 80% likelihood that it has everything to do with racism and not a damn thing to do with basketball. And there is a corresponding, pretty high likelihood that it also has to do with a young woman named Angel Reese claiming that white fans were hurling vicious racist abuse at her, which she has a habit of doing. In fact, she seems to do it just about every time she is asked a question that she doesn't feel like answering. It's really rather uncanny. Why did I clank that 3-foot shot off the front rim with the game on the line? I don't know. Why didn't you go ask the crack-ass Peckerwood motherfuckers that were screaming racist-ass abuse at me? Maybe they done made me miss that shot. And you may have also seen a story, and God, how badly I sometimes wish I was making this stuff up, about the Minnesota Lynx, which is apparently the name of an actual WNBA team, and that's Lynx, not Links, so they are scary she-cats and not Scottish golfers, just in case you were wondering. But those idiots, just last week, in the year of our Lord 2025, actually just had a pre-game tribute for St. George Floyd, patron saint of dudes who pistol whip pregnant women during home invasion robberies. Peace be upon him. But wait, I hear you say, didn't everyone in corporate America quickly get over the veneration of St. George Floyd like several years ago? Didn't we have a summer of fiery but mostly peaceful riots accompanied by industrialized extortion? And didn't dead George Floyd get to have a nationwide funeral tour? And then everyone realized how embarrassing that spectacle all was and they stopped talking about it? Well, don't tell that to the Minnesota Lynx, by God. And could I ever do justice to this without playing the actual footage? No, I don't think I could, because I ain't that good. So here's the actual footage of some Minnesota Lynx player. So would that make her a Minnesota Lynx? I don't know.
Thank you guys for taking a minute to honor the life of George Floyd. George was a father, a brother, and a son. And his life, like every life, held meaning. His death exposed the holes that are so in our justice and criminal institutions today. And his 5-year anniversary reminds us that we must continue the fight against criminal, racial, racial and social injustices. We cannot stay silent. Every life deserves respect and dignity. Thank you.
Telling us about what a totally awesome guy George Floyd was. Now, was this person playing for Minnesota back 5 years ago when the George Floyd summer of fiery but mostly peaceful love took place? I expect she probably wasn't, but full disclosure, I don't care enough to look it up. The point being, it seems like there's a fairly overwhelming likelihood that this is something that she was made to do by the people who run the team. So yeah, it's a real mystery why the WNBA has never turned one nickel of profit in its entire 30-year existence, because there is an expression in public relations, and I assume this professional sports franchise has some sort of public relations department, and the expression is, read the room, you fucking moron. In other words, if you want lots of people to buy tickets for your team's games, or watch the team on television, buy the team's merchandise, any of that stuff, and the other things that teams traditionally want their fans to do, maybe don't have a George Floyd worship session before the game. So just as a wild hypothetical, imagine yourself as a Minnesota Lynx season ticket holder, assuming that such a creature really exists, and imagine that you're not a wild-eyed radical leftist. You're just someone who really enjoys watching women play basketball. Again, assuming for argument's sake that such a creature really exists. How would you feel about the team making you sit through a goddamn St. George Floyd struggle session before the start of the game? I mean, what, did they also have a good long kneel during the national anthem right afterward? I feel like they probably did, which, again, from a marketing and public relations standpoint, is a pretty wild way of going about things if you are trying to make your product have maximal appeal to the widest possible cross-section of the public at large. But I don't think anybody in the WNBA actually thinks that way. The WNBA and the teams in the WNBA and the players on the teams in the WNBA, for the most part, seem to think their league exists as just a vessel for hard-left racial and gender ideology, and the race-pandering buffoons whom we used to call the sports media seem to be fully on board with that project too, because seriously, watch any WNBA post-game press conference and call me the first time there is a question about basketball and not racism. Especially if it is a Chicago Sky game involving Angel Reese, and double especially if it's a Chicago versus Indiana game involving Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark. Because here's the big problem the WNBA has right now. They are a league that has chosen to define itself by hard-left racial and gender politics, whose best player is a straight white girl. And if you cheer for the straight white girl, the black lesbians who think they own the league will tell you what a bad, terrible, racist homophobe you are, because that's just where we are now. And if you thought things were bad with institutionalized wokesterism in men's sports, which they were, and still are in some cases, it pales in comparison to the way it is in women's sports. Men's sports have been trying, some more imperfectly than others, to slowly back away from that stuff since it reached its crescendo of absurdity back at the start of this decade. But women's sports have stayed right up on that hobby horse, and they show no inclination of wanting to climb down anytime soon. And so what's the practical reality that you're left with? Well, if you want to play women's professional basketball in the United States, you have to either be a militant black lesbian or willing to prostrate yourself before the altar of militant black lesbianism, which is the road, regrettably, that Caitlin Clark has elected to go down. She issues these terrible, mealy-mouthed statements about how black women were the trailblazers in this league and they didn't get the recognition they deserve, and here I am, Miss Cracker-ass Peckerwood, standing on the shoulders of these magnificent black Nubian goddesses, and I am so very profoundly unworthy, and I promise to work on trying to be less white and less heterosexual in the future. And it's not entirely her fault, because what the hell is she supposed to do? She plays a great game, her team wins in dominant fashion, she goes into the post-game press conference, and all the questions are about racism and homophobia, the presumption being that she owes the world some sort of explanation for not being a black lesbian. The mere fact that she is the best player in the league and neither gay nor black, well, that makes her a lightning rod for controversy, and she's constantly being made to answer questions from fake journalist performance artists about why she is so unacceptably non-intersectional. So the WNBA, and this is just demonstrable and inarguable, is a place where it is seen as rather wildly non-normative for the employees to be white heterosexuals, or, worse yet, white heterosexual conservatives, or, worst of all, white heterosexual Christian conservatives. And I think we can put the U.S. national women's soccer team into that category too, frankly. That team is also a place where ideas of normativity revolve around being a purple-haired lesbian who is able to mouth all of the fashionable current woke left catchphrases on command, and yet, rather incongruously, some of those same people on the leftist lunatic fringe still believe, and we know they believe it because they tell us all the time, that we are still living in some sort of oppressively heteronormative, white normative, nuclear family normative, Christian normative society, where all of the alphabet people are cruelly oppressed and marginalized. But you know how that script goes. You've heard it 10,000 times before. But doesn't it sound increasingly comical when you juxtapose those words with a ground level reality that says vast sectors of the society, not just women's sports, but the news industry, the entertainment industry, even some sectors of the central government, are wholly owned and operated by sex pervert race hucksters with Palestine flags in their social media profile where the picture of the M95 mask used to be? Or when you juxtapose those words with the ground level reality we saw just the other day up in Seattle, the original home of Chaz Chop and the Summer of Love, when some Christians tried to have an anti-abortion event in a public park. They had all the proper permits and everything. And of course, they were immediately set upon and violently assaulted by a mob of alphabet people. And then the mayor of Seattle issues a statement saying that the Christians, obviously, are at fault for getting attacked because they were engaged in something called an extreme right-wing anti-LGBTQ agenda, according to the mayor. And man, you want to talk about wildly shifting the Overton window? So here we have the mayor of a major American city saying that being opposed to abortion is not only right-wing extremism, but also somehow, by some amazing intellectual flight of fancy, anti-gay. And I think I'll need that one explained to me, because if there's any group of people in the world who don't have any skin in the abortion game, isn't it the gays? I mean, feel free to point out what part of me is getting this wrong, but the point being, when some Christians gathering together in a public park saying Christian things is all it takes to get violently attacked by a mob of crazed alphabet people in a major American city in the third decade of the 21st century, you will have to forgive me for scoffing at the claim that we are a society held in thrall to heteronormative Christian normative traditional principles, because we very much are not. But if we start going down that road, it's the one road they don't want to go down, because inevitably the question will arise: when has our activism achieved its purpose? What does your desired end state look like? What world is the kind of world that would make you sigh contentedly and sit down just like Thanos and say, yes, my work here is done, we're finished? In other words, what's the limiting principle to your activism? But they don't want to talk about limiting principles. They don't like limiting principles very much at all. Whatever kryptonite is to Superman, limiting principles are to leftist activism, because you can't have limiting principles in leftist activism. You can't even talk about limiting principles being a thing that exists. There is only the eternal struggle. What does the struggle seek to achieve? That's not important. The important thing is that you are angry at your perceived oppressor. The important thing is that you dutifully attend every protest, attack the people you were told to attack, wave the flags that you're told to wave, and chant the inane catchphrases that you're told to chant. And sure, one day you're going to wake up and have that terrifying moment of clarity when it's already far too late to do anything about it, that you've devoted your entire life to being somebody else's sock puppet and you've gained absolutely nothing in the bargain. In fact, you might have that terrifying moment of clarity about 3.5 years from now, when the realization dawns that the bad orange man has shuffled off the political stage. He's gone forever now. And what benefit did I ever gain from the energies that I spent irrationally hating that man every day for 12 years just because I was told to do that? And while you grapple with that question, I am going to go out in the driveway and clank some 3-footers off the front rim. Like Angel, if I could be like Angel. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much indeed for watching. Have a great day and a pleasant tomorrow. See you next time. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.